Hello, and welcome back to another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. I did 11 years in prison, and I talk about prison stuff. Today, we're talking about the day I got out of prison. So, in the last video, I was telling you about my last year down. I was in a mental health unit. I played some concerts in the mental health unit. These folks didn't want to help me get set up with a spot, an apartment. You know, I had the money to pay for it, but nobody was helping me actually contact someone with an apartment or a house I could rent or something like that. So they were forcing me to go to my mother's house. The night before I left, everyone was cheering for me and stuff. They remembered me from the concert, or they knew me because I've been down for a while, and that felt really good. And that night, I don't know that I slept a lot. I can't remember much about that night, to be honest. I think I just paced the cell a lot. 11 years, and it was finally going to be over. I went in when I was 17, and I knew nothing about existing in the free world as an independent adult. I almost felt like I was 18 years old, and I was moving out of my parents' house for the first time. But I was technically moving back in with my mom, so maybe that's not a good analogy. But I was nervous. I was excited. I kind of felt like I was going to throw up because my body was just real tense. I was sweating. It was August 2018. And the night before I got out, they gave me boxes to pack all my stuff up. And I was going to take all that stuff up to A&D, admissions and discharge. First thing in the morning, they would call me over there and they would process me out. Morning rolled around and I came out of my cell when they ran the door. They told me to go up to A&D. I said goodbye to JR. I shook his hand. I told him it's been good, man. Shook hands with a couple other folks on the run and I started pushing my cart up there. It was a pretty nice morning, and being summertime, the sun was rising early, and I was pushing the cart up to A&D, and you have to walk past everything in Lansing, you know, all the old cell houses. You have to walk past the yard up to the visitation area, then you go around, and A&D's right there, and they process you out. I get up there and they had to go through my property. You know, they had to make another inventory of my property to make sure we weren't stealing prison stuff. All the other guys that were up there were doing the same thing. They asked me if I wanted a white button down or if I just wanted to leave in my prison t-shirt, and I wanted a white button down. Still left in my prison jeans, and I wore my sneakers out. It seems like we sat there for forever. They had us in a little holding tank for the most part. That's what it was. And there was probably 10 or 15 other guys there. And they were all talking about what they were going to do when they got out. Most of these guys were getting out from the minimum. You know, they were short timers or the medium, but they all seemed to be short timers. You know, I think the longest one had been down was 3 years. And 11 years isn't a long time. I've known people who have done 30 years, 40 years. I'm a short timer in my eyes, but compared to these guys, you know. But they were all talking about what they were going to do when they got out. And they were talking about, you know, I'm going to go get some dope. I'm going to go get spun out. Another dude's like, oh, I'm going to go get a hooker. Another dude's talking about going and getting drunk. And finally, one of them turned around and looked at me, and he's like, hey, man, what are you doing when you get out? Like, you've been down for a while. You got to be looking to party, right? I'm like, no, man. He's like, well, what are you going to do? I'm like, well, I'm going to go get a guitar, and I want to get a double quarter pounder with cheese. That's all I wanted to do. That's it. And none of them could understand that. Like, I wasn't trying to do something that was going to send me right back to prison. I just wanted to eat some fast food that had zero nutritional value and play metal. That was it. My buddy Robert was picking me up. I think he was supposed to be there around 8. but they couldn't start letting us out until the bus got there because some people were riding the bus. And, you know, when people started arriving and they started letting us out, I think it was closer to 9:30 or 10 o'clock. It felt like we'd been there for forever waiting to be let out. There was no TV in the holding tank or anything like that. And the longer that we sat there, I kind of felt like it was all a joke. You know, they weren't going to let us out after all. Then they brought us out to the front, and they had a counter. It was like a lobby area, and they took us up one by one to get these little cash cards or a check to get the money that was off our books. I got a little debit card, and then we would walk out the doors to the people that were waiting on us. And I got my money, and I walked out those doors. I had my cart full of property. Robert was there, and I don't know, I think he was in a 2003 Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution Sport or whatever it was. And it was a beat up car. It was in bad shape. But he got out of the car, I gave him a hug, and we started loading my property out of the cart into the car. And I was so stoked, man. I couldn't believe what was happening. I couldn't believe I was getting in a car and I was going to ride away from this fucking place. For the first time in 11 years, I didn't have a bunch of people looking over my shoulder. It was insane, man. It was absolutely insane. Robert had a lunchbox there in the car. You know, after we got everything loaded up, I'm sitting in the passenger seat. He hands me a lunchbox, and it had a coffee in it, an iced coffee, and I think it was a honey bun in there. And he said, "You're going to need that lunchbox for your first job." And I'm like, "Cool, man, thank you." He's like, "Don't worry, we're going to get you set up." And then he hands me this thing, and I had no idea what it was. It was one of these. And I had never really seen a smartphone in person. I'd seen them on TV before. But when I got arrested, you know, we were using flip phones and stuff. I think the BlackBerry had just come out. The first iPhone, I believe, came out the year I was arrested after I was already in jail. And this is such a foreign shape compared to how phones were back in the day. You know, it's super thin. And I'm like, what the hell are you handing me? You know, what is this? It looks like some kind of glass wafer. And he's like, "That's a phone, man." I couldn't unlock it. I couldn't, you know, it was just a knock thing. It was a Stylo 3, an LG Stylo 3. You just knocked on the screen to open it up. Couldn't figure it out. Once I got it open, I'm good enough with computers. I started figuring things out. Started playing with it. As we were pulling out of the prison, he's like, "Where do you want to go? Where do you want to eat?" And I said, "McDonald's, man. I want a double quarter pounder with cheese. We talked about this," which we had on the phone, you know. And he's like, "McDonald's it is." And I think we're going to go by the night transportation trucking company that Robert worked for. We're going to go by their yard and pick some stuff up from his truck or something like that. So we're leaving the prison, and we get to the corner after we're leaving the prison. We get down the street, we get to an intersection, and his car is like, you know, in 500 feet, turn right. I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? What is this, kid or something? Your car's talking to you? He's like, "No, man, it's Bluetooth." Like that's supposed to explain everything. It's Bluetooth. What the fuck is Bluetooth? You know, explain to me this sorcery. And, yeah, so that was interesting. And it messed me up for a while, you know, whenever we were going on this road or that road, as we were going up to the night yard. The car would talk to us periodically, and every time it started talking, it scared the shit out of me. Just because it's me and Robert in the car, and then all of a sudden somebody else starts talking. It was weird. The whole thing was so surreal, though. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I was getting motion sick, or maybe sick because of the anxiety as we were driving up tonight. But we got there, and his dog jumped out of the truck. You know, we were picking some stuff out of his semi. He had a Volvo. That's what Knight was using for their fleet at the time. And he opens the door, and this Border Collie German Shepherd mix comes bounding out of the truck and just jumps right into my arms, and we became fast friends. And then I climbed up in the truck because I wanted to take a look at his truck. I'm kind of a truck geek. You know, my dad was a truck driver for a while, and you know, I enjoy trucks, and it had been forever since I'd been in a big truck. So we sat up there and we kind of, you know, shot the shit for a little bit. Got in the car. Bailey loaded up. We went down to McDonald's in Olathe, I believe, and there was a Guitar Center nearby. So we go to McDonald's, and I didn't know he had the McDonald's app. He had already ordered everything, paid for it, all on his phone, and we just pulled up. And we're sitting there for a minute, and I didn't know what was going on. I thought we were just sitting there shooting the shit until we were going to go inside and get our food, since he didn't go through the drive-thru. But no, you know, almost immediately, someone comes out and they just start handing Robert food through the window. I was so confused. This is not the way fast food worked back in the day. You couldn't just pull up and people come bring you food. You have to, you know, go through a drive-thru, pay for it, stuff like that. But it was all on the app, you know. And so this guy hands him a bunch of food and walks off, and I'm looking around all paranoid because I think we just committed a crime somehow, because I didn't see money change hands. I didn't see a credit card come out. I didn't see anything happen. Some dude just walked up to us and gave us food. And I'm like, whoa. Okay. You know, and as I'm in the midst of freaking out about it, Robert's like, it's cool, man. It's on an app. I paid for it. Not that stealing burgers is a big deal. I guess it is once, you know, the day that you get out of prison and you're worried about going back because you feel like it's all too good to be true. So we went there, then we went to Guitar Center, and I picked up a guitar. A lot of you have seen the Rhodes V that I have in some of my videos. That's the guitar that I got the day that I got out. And we started heading to Marion, Kansas, which is south of Emporia, about half hour, somewhere around there. That's where I was paroling to. I was going to Marion, Kansas, and I was going to be staying with my mom. Before I went to my mom's house, though, we had to stop in Emporia to see my parole officer. The ride over there was kind of weird, you know. We were coming from the Kansas City area going over there. But it felt weird because I was on my own. I didn't have a guard looking over my shoulder all the time. I said that before, but I mean, it kind of sticks out in my mind. It was very surreal, you know, being able to look out the window and see the scenery and stuff. I was behind the walls in Lansing, so I didn't have a chance to see scenery or anything. Behind the walls, you have big limestone walls around the place, and you can't see the horizon, you know. We get to Emporia. We go to see the parole officer. Her name was Amy Finnerty, and she was very easy to get along with. She was a nice lady, and she shot straight with me. She said, you know what, don't lie to me. You have to have a place to stay. You have to have a job. You have X amount of time to get a job. You can't get drunk. You can't get high. You can't have weapons. And it all seemed really fair, you know. And it was a big stress reliever to actually meet her, because I had heard horror stories about people who were on parole and how horrible it was. And this lady seemed pretty reasonable and pretty nice. So I met with her, and then it was off to Marion, Kansas. And I got down there. We pulled up in the front yard. And my mom was there, and I gave her a big old hug, you know. I hadn't seen my mom in a couple of years since I'd been in El Dorado. And she just broke down and started crying. And I broke down and started crying. We hadn't met each other and had that hug or embrace since I was 17 years old. Hadn't had that without supervision since I was 17 years old, you know. And it's nice to have that contact with your people, even when you're locked up in the visitation room. You know, you hug your people and tell them that you love them. But the entire time, you know, there's someone looking over your shoulder, and you have to go back to your cell, and they have to go back to their house, and you go your separate ways without each other. And it sucks. You know, if any of you have ever gone up to visit somebody in prison, you know what it's like to see someone you love and then go home knowing that they have to stay there in that place. And for people who have been to prison, you go out there and you visit someone in visitation, and at the end of visitation, you have to go back to prison, you know, because while you're out there in that visitation environment for a little while, some of those cares and worries that come with being in prison, they kind of go away a little bit. And then it's back to reality. When visitation's over, you go back and lock up in that cell. And when I saw my mom that day, it wasn't like that. We could just sit there and talk and reminisce, and she made me a big dinner. And it was beautiful, man. It was beautiful. I wish that I could have just paused that day, you know, in that moment, and stayed in that conversation and stayed in that state of mind that I was in. It was something really special, you know. I plugged in my new guitar and my amp, because I picked up an amp while I was at Guitar Center as well. You know, after Robert and I went to McDonald's, we went over to Guitar Center, and I picked out that guitar, which that was something in itself, but it was cool. But I plugged my amp in and plugged my guitar in. I played some music for my mom. You know, she's a big classic rock fan, so I played some stuff for her, and we just had a great time. And, you know, I went to bed that night. My mom had a room set up for me, and Robert had to go back to work, I think, in the next couple of days, so he just stayed on the couch, and he was going to go back up to Kansas City, pick up the truck, and he was going to be off doing his own thing. But for the first time in a long time, I was finally free. I was finally free. And it seemed too good to be true. But it was. And it still is. I'm still here. This has been another episode of From Prison to the Streets. I'm Eric. Thank you for watching. I love y'all. I appreciate you. I will see y'all later.
Break. Break these chains.